It's lovely to be back with you. In our last lecture, we were addressing the Lakota vision of the nature of reality and of how reality is saturated with meaning in virtue of its symbolic character. We saw Lame Deer saying, Native Americans see themselves as enfolded from birth by symbols, surrounded by things that aren't merely natural objects and are not artificially symbolic, but are naturally symbolic, naturally representational. This took us back to thinking about meaning in a different sense from that we've been thinking about it in for the remainder of these lectures. That is to go back to the idea that meaning doesn't only mean broader significance, but also means symbolic reference. So for the Sioux, the pot, for instance, was pregnant with meaning. It entailed symbols that meant the sky, symbols that meant the animals, symbols that linked us in our interaction with that pot to an entire sacred order of reality. We also saw that it's not enough to recognize that the world is pregnant with symbolism in this sense, but that it's deeply important that we learn to notice these symbols if we are to lead our lives meaningfully. That is, to lead our lives in recognition of the meaning that surrounds us and in recognition of the symbolic character of our own behavior, of our own lives, of our own comportment. The point here, and we concluded last time with this point, but I want to recall it, is that the critique of modernity implicit in this Lakota Sioux vision is not that the Native American world is a world rich with symbols and that the European or the non-native world is devoid of symbols. Rather, as we saw in that wonderful contrast of circles versus squares, of the circular symbols so central to a Native American vision and the square symbols that Lame Deer saw permeating a European tradition. The important point is that Native Americans recognize the value of the symbols, recognize the meanings of these symbols, and live in constant awareness of that symbolic character, and so can respond to it. Lame Deer's deep critique of modernity is that modern Europeans, although we live in a world full of symbols, many of them symbols of our own contrivance, we don't notice their symbolic character. Because we don't notice their symbolic character, they work on us subconsciously. Because they work on us subconsciously, we don't even see them as symbolic. We just take them as natural, as ordinary, as the only way the world can be. And so we don't allow ourselves even a vision beyond them that allows us to see that there's an alternative. Instead, we lead a life constrained by them, complicit in that constraint, without even an awareness that we are constraining ourselves or that that constraint is an option as opposed to the only way to live. Today, we're going to begin to examine the role of money in all of this and the role of the economy in all of this. Because we're going to see here a lot of echo of Gandhi's critique of modernity in Lame Deer. That is, we saw that Gandhi thought that money, the modern economy, and liberal capitalism, articulated through industrialism, turns most human beings into working machines instead of actual persons. For Gandhi, though, remember what a meaningful life turned out to be is a life of constant service, a life of constant work, a life of constant engagement. That is, Gandhi was focusing for his account of a meaningful life really on the Gita, the idea of karma yoga, a yoga of action, a yoga of devotion. Lame Deer's not going to follow him there. For Lame Deer, the meaningful life is going to be a life of calm reflection, a life in which we really come to appreciate and to live in harmony with the symbolic order that surrounds us. Let's begin. Lame Deer, writing about his own youth here and his own perspective on reality even before he embarked upon his career as a medicine man, just the way that he was brought up as a Native American. Let's hear what he says. He says, I was like many other full-bloods. I didn't want a steady job in an office or a factory. I thought myself too good for that. Not because I was stuck up, but simply because any human being is too good for that no life. That no life, he says. This is very cool. Look what Lame Deer is saying. He's saying, I didn't want a real job. I didn't want a job in an office. I didn't want a job in a factory. I didn't want a job working for somebody else, because I'm too good for that. But one way that we might hear that I'm too good for that is as a bit of personal arrogance. Other people can do that job. Other people can work like that, but not me. I'm too good for that. But that's not what Lame Deer is saying. Lame Deer is saying, I recognize myself, that is Lame Deer, to be a human being. And no human being deserves a life like that. As he puts it, any human being is too good for that no life. Because as far as Lame Deer is concerned, that's not a way of life. That is, working a constant job, governed by a time clock and so forth, is not a way of life. It's an abandonment of life. And this leads directly to one of Lame Deer's most poignant critiques of modernity, his critique of the emphasis on money and commodity fetishism. And I'm going to read to you one of my favorite passages from Lame Deer's discussion. It's one that focuses on the battle at the Bighorn in which General Custer's army was eliminated by Sitting Bull. And it's going to focus on Lame Deer's sardonic look at money. The green frog skin. That's what I call a dollar bill. This is not meant to be, by the way, a positive evaluation of a dollar bill. In our attitude towards it lies the biggest difference between Indians and whites. My grandparents grew up in an Indian world without money. Notice that. We take for granted that a world has to be a world in which money figures. And that's part of the totalizing character of modernity that Lame Deer worries about, that we don't even have a vision of a world that different from ours. But Lame Deer's emphasizing there's an alternative. My grandparents grew up in an Indian world without money. Just before the Custer battle, the white soldiers had received their pay. Their pockets were full of green paper, and they had no place to spend it. What were their last thoughts as an Indian bullet or arrow hit them? I guess they were thinking of all that money going to waste. That must have hurt them more than the arrow between their ribs. Here, Lame Deer is focusing on what we notice, what we think about, what's salient in our lives. Even if this remark about Custer's soldiers isn't literally true, what he's pointing out is the fact that for most of us, we are very often thinking about money, thinking about possessions, thinking about our debts, thinking about our salary, and so forth. And that becomes salient in our life. That moves to center stage. That becomes the object around which we organize our lives. But now ask yourself, as Nietzsche would have asked you, as Gandhi would have asked you, and as Lame Deer is asking, if I really reflect and I really ask myself the question, is that how I think a life ought to be organized? Is that the way I want to lead my life? Do I, on my deathbed, want to say, I thought all the time about money, and that's a really good way to have spent my life? Lame Deer is suggesting that that's not something that even we Europeans would reflectively endorse. That's a problem, because that means that modernity has alienated us from who we are. He continues. The close hand-to-hand fighting had covered the battlefield with an enormous cloud of dust, and in it, the green frog skins of the soldiers were whirling around like snowflakes in a blizzard. Now, what did the Indians do with all that money? They gave it to their children to play with, to fold those strange bits of color paper into toy buffalo and horses. Somebody was enjoying that money after all. Now, the point here is a very straightforward one, of course. He's focusing on a metaphor. The money was enjoyed after all. It was useful. It was useful in precisely the way that money can be useful. It was useful instrumentally. It was useful as a way of creating nice toys for children. Lame Deer is pointing out that if we think about money clearly, we can think about it the way that these Native American children thought about it. Something useful, not something that deserves to be the focus of our lives, but something that can play a subsidiary role, something that can symbolize something, that can be used for something, but not the central organizing principle. Lame deer continues. The green frog skin, that was what the fight was all about. Notice how he brings the symbol, the metaphor, back down to reality. The green frog skin a moment ago was just this symbol of the way we organize our lives. Now he's pointing out that that symbol was in fact the reality here. The gold in the black hills. The prairie dogs are poisoned because they eat grass. Now I want you to notice this. He's moved from the gold in the black hills, talking about what Custer was fighting for, to the contemporary moment, to the present day. He doesn't see a difference there, and that's important too. The prairie dogs are poisoned because they eat grass. 1,000 of them eat as much grass in a year as a cow. So if the rancher can kill that many prairie dogs, he can run one more head of cattle, make a little more money. When he, that is the rancher, looks at a prairie dog, he sees only a green frog skin getting away from him. That's a very, very profound remark. Lame deer is pointing out that when a Native American looks at a prairie dog, he sees an animal. He sees another member of our civilization, another member of the community of which we belong. The prairie dog, if it's symbolic of anything, is symbolic of a natural order that enfolds us. When the rancher looks at the prairie dog, he sees a symbol as well. But Lame deer points out that what he sees a symbol of is a dollar bill flying away. And so he sees a symbol of a symbol of a symbol that has come to be the principle around which he organizes his life. It's a reversal of what's important. The Native American, he suggests, sees at best the green frog skin, the dollar bill, as a symbol of what it can do. The rancher sees the natural world as symbolic of this artificial symbol. And that's a very deep kind of reversal of priority and a very deep kind of alienation. This is what we might call the fetishism of money, treating money not as an instrumental good, but as something sacred in its own right, something that acquires a value well beyond what its actual value is. But we also see here this emphasis on totalization, the idea that everything, grass, prairie dogs, the Black Hills, comes to be seen only in monetary terms, that everything becomes seen in terms of its instrumental value, and its instrumental value in terms of its economic use value. When we do this, Lame deer is pointing out, we're not fleeing from a world of symbols. We're not fleeing from a world that's pregnant with meaning. We're moving from one kind of symbolic world to another. We are imposing a new symbolic order on our world, a symbolic order in which everything stands for money. But that's not a productive symbolic order. That's a destructive one. It's a destructive one because it takes us away from our own being, from our own nature, from our own context, into a completely artificial context that transforms us from what we would like to be to something that we would never want ourselves to become, but which we nonetheless construct a modernity that ensures that we will become like that. Referring to our own symbols, Lame deer says, the bald eagle is your symbol, now referring to our national symbol, of course. You see him on your money, but your money is killing him. When a people start killing off their own symbols, they're in a bad way. That's a very nice insight. We might put the bald eagle up there on the money, put the bald eagle on the Great Seal, and see the eagle as a symbol. But our own way of life, by destroying habitat, by destroying fisheries, manages to turn the bald eagle into an endangered species. He says, when people start killing off their symbols, they're in a bad way. Not just because there's a deep irony there, not just because it shows that they don't care, but that it shows that they've lost the ability to connect with symbols as symbols. If we lose the ability to really appreciate the symbolic character of the eagle, then we are quite happy to simply let it become endangered and let it disappear. The disappearance is bad enough, but the alienation from the natural order we inhabit is the disease of which that's a symbol, of which that's a symptom. So for Lame deer, the symbolic and the natural orders go hand in hand. Symbols are part of reality, reality is completely symbolic. But commodity fetishism and this systematic ignoring of symbols, this systematic living in a world in which we are ignorant of the significance of what goes on around us, also go hand in hand. When we commodify things, when we see them only in terms of their economic value, and then when we see the economic value as all that matters, we abstract ourselves from the natural world precisely because we abstract ourselves from its symbolic character. And when we do that, we commodify. We commodify the world, we commodify the prairie dog, we commodify the grass, we commodify the mountains, we commodify the air, we commodify the water. In the end, we commodify ourselves. We see other individuals in terms of what they can do for us. How much money can I make from their labor? Or how much salary would he or she pay me? Or how much would it cost to hire him to do this? So we end up commodifying each other. And when we manage to commodify everything, we end up literally killing the world. We kill the world because a world that we would care to live in would be a world that would be meaningful, a world that would be rich with symbolism and not this kind of dead commodification. We end up living in a world that's square, not a world that's circular, a world that's a prison, not a world that's organic. And that's not a world any of us would choose to live in, despite the fact that every day, in every action, we make choices that entail the necessity of just such a world. Because in that kind of world, there's no possibility for real life. All we get is what Lame Deer called the no life, that everybody is too good to live. Now, this critique of alienation continues for Lame Deer because he argues that we alienate ourselves deeply from nature, including not only the natural world, but our own nature. This is a beautiful line. Lame Deer writes, "You have not only despoiled the earth, the rocks, the minerals, all of which you call dead, but which are very much alive." Notice that. That's a very nice point. Lame Deer is emphasizing that while we draw a very clear line, that is modern European culture, between the biological world, the biotic world of plants and animals, and the non-biological world of minerals, that line is a very dangerous one to draw, precisely because the biological world depends for its integrity, depends for its life on that non-biological world. So to call these things dead is to artificially carve them off from the biosphere. And in doing that, it gives us a kind of implicit permission, a permission that we take advantage of all too often to despoil this stuff, to commodify it, forgetting the dramatic impact that it has on everything else around us. But he continues, "You have even changed the animals, which are part of us, of the Great Spirit, changed them in a horrible way so no one can recognize them." Here he's talking about the phenomenon of domestication, a very serious phenomenon for Lame Deer. He says, "There's power in a buffalo, spiritual, magic power, but there is no power in an Angus or Hereford." So he's saying, look, what we end up doing through the kind of domestication and selective breeding of animals is to get rid of the natural animals that have got a kind of beauty and an integrity and a place in an ecosystem, and to create these strange artificial animals which can only live on feedlots, or which can only live in cages, which can only live in domestication. The kinds of things which are symbolic of exactly what might be uncomfortable for us, instead of symbolic of what could be beautiful for us. And when you think about a wolf, when you think about an eagle, when you think about a buffalo, you think about things like freedom, power, ecological interdependence, and so forth. When you think about an Angus, or when you think about one of those hens bred for batteries, you think about a very uncomfortable, tragic no life of domestication. So Lame Deer is calling upon us, again, this kind of call of conscience, as Nietzsche would have put it, to ask, can we endorse the world that we've created? Is this the world that we would have said to ourselves at the beginning, we want to create? Is this the kind of life we would have said to ourselves, we want to live? His conviction is that when we ask ourselves those questions directly, in a way that hits our conscience, the answer has to be no. And if that's so, his critique is very much like Gandhi's, telling us we've managed to create a life that none of us could endorse. The only reasonable option is to step out of it, to see that there are alternatives, and to embrace them. He continues on this theme. He says, "You've not only altered, declawed, and malformed your winged and four-legged cousins, you have done it to yourselves." Now the critique really comes home, because now Lame Deer is going to be arguing that we've managed to destroy our own humanity. "You have changed men into chairmen of boards, into office workers, into time clock punchers." What does this mean? It doesn't just mean that we've given people jobs and made them work hard, made them put on suits and ties or whatever. What it means is that we've changed what we think it is to be human into something else. So imagine this, for instance. I think this is the kind of phenomenon that Lame Deer might have very much in mind. When you meet somebody, suppose you're sitting on an airplane, or you're waiting for a bus, or you're just having a conversation in a checkout line or something like that, and you introduce yourself, "Hi, my name is so-and-so, my name's so-and-so." Pretty soon you ask something like, "What do you do? What do you do?" And then we answer, "I'm a dentist," or "I'm a teacher," or "I'm a lawyer," or "I'm a carpenter," or "I'm a bricklayer," whatever. "I'm retired." We answer the question who we are in terms of our occupation, in terms of a place that we play as cogs in a larger machine, in square cubicles, in square buildings. That's what Lame Deer means. We don't think of ourselves as human beings anymore, as biological animals who live in an ecosystem with other biological animals, who can see, feel, taste, who live in time, who are going to die, who have children, and so forth. We think of ourselves in terms of our functions in an economic order and not otherwise. That is, the symbols in which we understand ourselves are now these artificial economic symbols, not the symbols of a larger natural life. "You have changed women into housewives, truly fearful creatures." Now, of course, there's a lot of humor there, but part of what's fearful isn't just this kind of a caricature that Lame Deer is worrying about, but the idea that somebody could identify themselves as a being whose purpose and whose nature is to live inside and to manage a confined house in a bunch of square walls. That is a kind of voluntary prisoner whose job is to maintain her prison. That's what Lame Deer finds so devastating. This is not the kind of life that one would say, this is what human beings evolved for, to live indoors and to confine themselves and to maintain them. He emphasizes that in this wonderful statement. "You live in prisons which you have built for yourselves, calling them homes, offices, factories." This idea of being complicit in our own imprisonment, complicit in our own oppression, and complicit in it in a completely unreflective way that makes it impossible for us to even imagine a life of freedom outside of the walls that we've so carefully constructed. This idea leads to Lame Deer's final kind of analysis of alienation into an ersatz life, into what he thinks of as spiritual suicide. He talks in a wonderfully contemptuous way about the use of deodorants and perfumes. He points out that human beings in modernity, that is European modernists, are even disgusted by the natural odors of a healthy human body, by the odors that come from under our armpits, from off of our skin, and so forth. And so we scrub ourselves with deodorant soaps to make the natural odors go away. We put on underarm deodorants. We put on artificial perfumes to make us smell like something else. Points out that that's a really life-denying, self-abnegating act to perform. Because what it does, here you can see again Lame Deer following Nietzsche, what it does is it represents the fact that we try as hard as we can to deny the fact that we're biological animals, that we actually lead lives. And denying that is denying who we are. It's a profound self-alienation, a deprecation of our own fundamental nature. The most terrible thing you could do to yourself, to say, I'm the kind of being that I just don't even want people to know that I am. That is alive, 'alive, 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 I think white people are so afraid of the world they created that they don't want to see, feel, smell, or hear it. Living in boxes that shut out the heat of the summer and the chill of winter. Living inside a body that no longer has a scent. Hearing the noise from the hi-fi instead of listening to the sounds of nature. Watching some actor on TV having a make-believe experience when you no longer experience anything for yourself. This is a powerful and profound indictment. You can imagine Tolstoy nodding at this one. You can imagine Nietzsche nodding at this one, but you can imagine them nodding, saying this has just gone a step further. What Lame Deer is pointing out is that the end of this path of rejecting the symbolic, of rejecting the natural, of fetishizing commodities, of denying that we ourselves are biological, is to lead a completely ersatz life, a life that's a stand-in for a real life, a no life that forces us to become spectators to other people's lives. Remember Nietzsche's wonderful question of conscience. Are you an actor or are you a spectator? And Lame Deer is pointing out that the nature of modernity is to turn us into spectators, not even of our own lives, spectators of other people's lives, because we've already deprecated our own as not even worth living. We're just prisoners looking at televisions that give us views into other people's cells. That's a fierce indictment of modernity. So Lame Deer's analysis begins with an analysis of our alienation from nature and our alienation from the symbolic, and carries us through to alienation from ourselves as natural objects. If we can't appreciate our own natural character, Lame Deer urges, then we can't appreciate our place in nature. And if we can't appreciate our place in nature, we can't appreciate the symbolic blanket that enfolds us. And if we can't appreciate that, we can't apprehend meaning. And if we can't apprehend meaning, there is no meaning in our lives. And the totalization that modernity implies, the fact that it sets itself up as the only option, that fetishism becomes natural, precludes our ability to see anything else. Lame Deer is banging on our prison doors, pointing out that they're locked from the inside, asking us to open them, to come out, to consider another way to live, to consider a way to live that is far more meaningful, far more genuine. Lame Deer points out that many anthropologists and many educators think of Indian values, Native American values, the values of community, the values that reject money, that valorize nature, that would allow the sun dance, as outdated, as primitive, as tribal, or even as pathological, as leading to laziness and a lack of progress. But Lame Deer argues that that's wrong, that the pathology is in modernity. And the pathology arises precisely from these very pillars of modernity that we explored when we looked at Hume, Mill, and Kant. Its commitment to progress, where progress is seen as material progress, economic progress, progress away from nature. And its emphasis on reason as opposed to an emphasis on perception and symbolic appreciation. These are built into modernity. And for that reason, Lame Deer thinks, a certain kind of intolerance is built into modernity. An intolerance of the Native American view, for instance. And that intolerance, in fact, prevents us from learning from others, even from learning from Lame Deer. So we get a kind of internal critique. Modernity is built on this idea of reason and progress, but its very nature makes it impossible for it to learn, for it to progress in important ways. Finally, Lame Deer argues, modernity also alienates us from death. As we've seen, so many of the views about the meaning of life that we've examined, those of Taoism, of Stoicism, that of Shantideva, of Tolstoy, of Nietzsche, remind us that facing death, confronting the reality of death and coming to terms with it, is essential to leading a meaningful life. But Lame Deer argues that modernity sweeps death under the rug, even though it markets it as in another guise. Remember again Shantideva, who argues that our suffering is caused by a pervasive awareness of death, coupled with a denial of it. Lame Deer argues that we cannot possibly live authentically if we don't take our own mortality seriously. what we end up doing is causing death to others needlessly, precisely because we think of it as trivial. And so we end up getting violence and inauthenticity as mutually reinforcing pathologies of modernity. Lame Deer says, "You are spreading death, buying and selling death. With all of your deodorants, you smell of it, but you're afraid of its reality. You don't want to face up to it. You have sanitized death, put it under the rug, robbed it of its honor. But we Indians think a lot about death." Notice what he's talking about. He's talking about a culture of violence, a culture of commodification, a culture of war, a culture of pollution, a culture of desecration of the natural order. All done in this kind of sanitized way through video games or by watching wars on television and so forth, or by using undertakers to put the bodies away. But we Indians think a lot about death. I do. Today would be a perfect day to die. Not too hot, not too cool. A day to leave something of yourself behind, to let it linger. Other days are not so good. They're for selfish, lonesome men, having a hard time leaving this earth. For whites, every day would be considered a bad one, I guess. That is, if we're going to understand our lives, we have to come to terms with our death. To come to terms with our death, we've got to actually think about it, plan it, accept it. Lame Deer's pointing out that a really authentic life, a life that understands us as natural objects, understands that we are indeed mortal. So some of what Lame Deer has been saying, we've seen before, that the meaning of life derives from connection to something greater, that it requires facing our own human nature, and that it requires facing death. That a meaningful life is a life lived in social harmony with others. It's a happy life. And like other critics of modernity we've examined, Lame Deer thinks that modernity is really dangerous to a meaningful life in virtue of its consumerism and mass culture. But some of what Lame Deer does is distinctive. His emphasis on the natural context, of the fact of our alienation from nature in modernity, and the ensuing self-alienation is a new insight. And his emphasis on the symbolic and sacred order of reality is a really special feature of the Lakota position. In our next lecture, we're going to turn to a figure who really tries to synthesize the pre-modern and the postmodern with a modern view, the present Dalai Lama. Please join me for that talk.